Welcome. We are live again for another debate with Hess and Yates. This is our second edition. We had so much fun the first one, we decided might as well crack on and try it again.
Yeah, we just got a message saying that we're down for 4 p.m., not 3 p.m., but it's 3 p.m., folks, because here we are doing it.
Yeah, maybe there's a time zone thing going on there. Maybe in Europe it might come up as 4. I'm not sure. But yeah, with that, I think the topic for today was a bit. We had some late hour decisions. We had a whole topic planned and ready to go. And the lesson for today, if you get nothing else from the video, is to vet your potential content, because you might find some surprises.
So it's a good job that you did, because we were well into the plan for this, weren't we? And
oh, it was a lengthy debate that we all broken down. I had all these great points to make, but I'm sure the due diligence will, the ideas from now will come back eventually. But it looks like we have 8 people with this, so go ahead and let us know you're here in the comments. Hello, Vegan Potterhead and Nikki. And I think maybe, these things are a bit loose compared to a normal formal debate setting, but I think it's only fair we both kind of frame where we come at from this thing and see where we're similar and where we're different. So for this week's topic, we are going to be discussing national groups and the grassroots.
Oh, I thought we were doing that video, Jeremy.
Well, we still can if you want to. We got it all ready to go.
No. Please, whatever you do, don't put that up on there. That was 2 days' work down the drain, that was, wasn't
it? I'm sure people can associate with that. Hello, Elliot and Corey. Nice of you to join us. And Nella. Yeah, so I guess I know those who follow your work will be quite familiar with your kind of positioning, that, obviously I think we're both in favor of finding ways to evolve and develop the grassroots. So perhaps, there's probably more similarities there. And then from a national group perspective, well, maybe we start there. What role do you think the national groups play?
Yeah, I think you're right. We're both going to agree on that we want a thriving grassroots, but we're probably going to disagree on what the kind of national groups kind of do to that kind of aspiration, I suppose. And in some ways, I've always thought that the national groups end up being a bit of a block. And I see Corey's here. Hi, Corey. And even social movement theory kind of suggests that when groups get big and professional and all that, they start to moderate and be much more careful, and the radical edge of a movement starts to get chipped away at. And so this is what we've seen really in the movement, But in terms of my kind of understanding of what we're talking about and the issue goes back to the 1970s. In fact, when I first started to get involved in 1977 with the Hunt Saboteurs and stuff, or tried to at least, it coincided with a kind of scandal involving the RSPCA to do with the embezzlement or the kind of misuse of money. And then when I was involved, which was like in the 1980s, so we're talking about 1980, 1981, we tried to have the Queen removed from the RSPCA. So a lot of people joined the RSPCA so they could go to the AGM, and we tried to get the Queen removed, which was voted for. And then there was a lunch break, and then we got told when we came back in the afternoon that the Queen had been reinstated by the board. And so I was starting to think, okay, what's going on with these big rich groups kind of thing. Then we had in 1981/82 the radicalization of the BYV. Now the BYV stands for British Union for the Abolition of Vivisection, which doesn't exist anymore. I believe it's now called Cruelty Free International. But when it was radicalized, it meant it was kind of taken over by much more radical people than had hitherto run the thing. In fact, there was lots of kind of animal welfare things and stuff in the office when we went in there. And one of the first things that they did was, because I was part and parcel of this, I remember Charing Cross in London, they made some "This is Vivisection" fly posters, which are really big vivisection things. One with a cat and one with a monkey. This is vivisection. And we basically wrapped them up, rolled them up, and sent them out to just about anybody we could think of the Sabs, anybody involved with early Sea Shepherd, all that kind of stuff. They just sent them out. And then all these fly posters went up all over the place. And also Animal Aid were doing some stuff on the local level too at the time. And so it was kind of that time when I realized the potential of the grassroots being given to access to some funds, because the way it used to work once the BWV was radicalized wasn't the case with Animal Aid. It was with the NAVs afterwards, which is the National Anti-Vivisection Group, is that if you kind of knew the people who were running these big groups, you could kind of not necessarily get a backhander, but you could get some funds. And then so I realized, well, okay, well, if the benefit of getting funds in the grassroots was so good, which it was, then if we were able to do that across the board, how could we would really be able to develop the grassroots? And I think that's where we're kind of at the moment. Ronnie Lee and I are both interested in this idea that if we can develop and empower the grassroots, we would develop the movement. And this is the age of the internet. I tend to think that the national group system is counter-revolutionary. That's how I would characterize it. Because
and if I can stop you there, by revolutionary, how would you frame revolutionary?
Well, I'm really talking about DIY politics and DIY culture, and so we're talking about bringing about. Well, you see, I think vegan animal rights is a revolutionary idea. It's got massive ramifications for society and for the planet even, and so it's a revolutionary idea, and that's reflected in the views of the pioneers of the vegan movement as well. And so once you kind of feed that radicalism through a national group system, it kind of gets diluted. Whereas if it stays on the grassroots footing, it remains much more kind of radical and also dynamic.
And that's to cater to donors, I guess. The whole theory being that to make the donor base happy, the message is more universally appealing, and by doing so, it's automatically going to de-radicalize it. It's going to reduce it. We're going to slip into welfare and reducitarianism and all those types of topics. Is that kind of what you're a bit of what you're talking about?
Yeah. Social movement theory would say that, once you start getting things like offices and, the other way of office, so you get an office, but also you get officers like press officers, that kind of stuff. Then, you start to get professionalized, and then people start to think in terms of their cause being a career. And so there's always a problem there. And it's not just restricted to the animal movement by any means. It kind of goes kind of across the board. And we certainly have seen, that phenomena in the animal movement, where once you start to professionalize and, you get yourself into this kind of, arena of professionalism, P45s, jobs, wages, and all this kind of stuff, it changes the movement. It just changes the ethos of a movement, and it de-radicalizes itself, because you're kind of having to first and foremost think about keeping the organization running. And in fact, in sociology, it's often said that people who are once radical end up running jumble sales in order to raise funds. And so it kind of takes the edge off it. That's what I'd argue.
Because on the surface, it seems like a good thing, right? If we could pay animal advocates to do things more full time, and they're not distracted by their day jobs, as it were. But yeah, like you say, that's a huge risk. So maybe it's a balancing act. Corey had a clarification up on the screen now to tell more about the why so strongly advocates remove the queen.
Why did we advocate? Oh, it was just the fact that she went hunting and stuff, and so she was a patron of the RSPCA, and of course it's interesting really, because this was like before Francione, and so just as it isn't, there's been a regression now. People, you see this in the movement now. If the RSPCA do something outrageous, and certify these eggs as humane and this kind of stuff, people are kind of outraged by it. But that's because they don't understand that it's a traditional animal welfare group. And so, it's no surprise that they would endorse free-range farming, for example. following people like even Singer and stuff. So that's not a surprise. They're a traditional animal group, and they've never pretended to be anything else. So, but at the time, there was outrage because the patron used to go hunting. So it wasn't really kind of, the Queen eats meat or anything like that. The Queen likes a dairy yogurt. It was the fact that she went hunting, and so they thought, okay, well, it'd be a political statement to get her kicked out, because also there's big fights going on in the RSPCA at the time. And in fact, I think there's quite a lot of that in the Animals film, if I remember right. People like Dick Corse were involved. Dick Corse used to be the prime mover of the League Against Cruel Sports, and there was the kind of old guard of the RSPCA and the radical. In fact, there used to be something called the RSPCA.
Elliot's onto it with the C word.
What?
Elliot's onto it. You mentioned the C word, one of your favorite words.
Yes, I love it.
And just a quick clarification, this is separate to our main shows we do on Sunday. This is a bit ad hoc, usually planned with about 12 hours in advance, so it's a bit more of a piecemeal, but the full cast will be back together again on Sunday for more of a structured show, but this is more of a detailed deep dive into the grassroots and national campaign. So it sounds like what you're saying is we need to direct, it seems like your focus is directing funds to the grassroots, however, at the same time, not almost too concentrated. It's more bottom up versus top down, it sounds like, that you want to have it spread throughout, which I guess anytime you have a central place to donate funds, you're at risk of them overly controlling them, aren't you? So, if they're not equitably distributing them, how do you stop that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I would just say, in terms of what you said originally, that to pretend that we've got a structured show on a Sunday is going a bit too far.
Well, that's a fair point. Well, it's more structured than this. It's all relative, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, no, there is a lot of planning that goes into it, folks. There is actually, honestly. So there's two.
And there's a lot. Real quickly, there's a lot of comments about the U.S. election going on. So we've got some competition going on here. I'm sure there's lots on the YouTube feeds about that going on. So we've got to be more engaging than that. So we'll see if we can match pace. Well, I'll just interrupt you constantly, and we'll have a good presidential debate going on.
I'm going to say, if we're going to role play, you could be Trump. I'm not going to be Trump. I'll tell you that first.
We'll draw straws.
So. There's two sides of the story for me, I think, in the sense that there's the benefit of developing and empowering the grassroots, and then there's the effect that a national group system has. I mean, for example, when I first started thinking about this, which is the 1980s, and there was this group called the Federation of Local Animal Rights Groups set up. It's now called the Federation of Vegan Local Animal Rights Groups, and there was like 5 anti-vivisection groups at the time. So there was 3 in England and 2 in Scotland. And they were all kind of duplicating each other's work. They all had officers, physical officers. They all had sales goods. They all had people who were employed to give them out. They all had CEOs and all the rest of it, and press officers and all that. And so the amount of wasted money through duplication was huge. And I've always said that if you got all the national group people lined up with the name of their job and the amount of money that they get paid, and I'm not opposed to money, I must clarify that. We will be shocked by the amount of waste, And the argument against that is that, well, if you give money to the grassroots, a lot of money is going to be wasted, which is definitely a risk, and we could talk about that perhaps. But certainly in terms of the way, there is a lot of waste, and there's more national groups and more people who are waged now in the movement than ever before. There are absolutely huge amounts. Now, if that money, rather than being held in these elite power centers, the power elite of the movement, if that was distributed, we would have loads and loads of funds to develop and empower and embolden the grassroots. And there's hunt saboteurs, I mean, how many times have we seen, the hunt saboteurs, they're scratching around to get themselves a Land Rover fixed? That shouldn't happen. We're a relatively rich movement. I know that we're not rich compared with our opponents. I understand that. But that's not relevant to this point. We are relatively rich, and it's just that I don't understand. You see, I'm in Ireland, right? And I know that there's going to be quite a lot of Viva and animal aid type members in Ireland. Well, what that means to me is that their money is flying over the Irish Sea to Kent, and London, away from Dublin and Galway and Limerick and Cork, where it's needed. And I've never understood why people would choose to do that, choose to kind of export the money. I do understand the reasons why people say they do it, and they've said it for years and years and years. And it's to do with things like thinking of the people in the national groups as the professionals, the experts, and this kind of stuff. And I think that's the kind of image. I don't think it bears scrutiny in the sense that there's a lot of, apart from the kind of people right at the top, there's a lot of staff that is kind of moving. All people come in from university for a couple of years and then they go and everything. And there's a lot of young people in the national groups, and they don't know that much, compared with some of the longer tooth people, if you like, in the grassroots even. So the idea that, well, we give money to them because they are the experts, that doesn't really hold water for me.
Well, and Corey's got a great comment maybe you can respond to here. Is an interesting case study is the vegan feminist faction. I don't know what your familiarity is with that, but they really advocated for community-based advocacy, critical of hierarchy, celebrity, big leadership, etc., and yet eventually pushed to go national. It failed. They folded after 20 years of running local chapters. Because that's the big thing. It's like human nature, isn't it? We've all got competing interests. Financial is certainly one of them. It sounds to me like you're saying, well, maybe would you like to reply to Corey's comment before I go off on a tangent? Yeah.
Yes, please, I would. My sister, my sister is well, she was. I'm not quite. If she still is, but she was. You would call her a radical separatist feminist. In fact, at one point, I was the only male who was allowed in her house. In fact, the police came to arrest me once, and I was in the house, and she sent them off to get some female officers in order to do it. But she was involved in the Leeds and Bradford area of West Yorkshire, and they had like a female-only yellow pages or golden pages. This kind of directory. This is before the internet. Directory of people who could do stuff, and so you had female plumbers and female electricians. This was all organized within the grassroots, and it was all local based. It was all kind of very kind of radicalizing. It was all enabling, and it just seemed to kind of go, well, we need this. Let's organize it on this local level. And in terms of doing something like that, you probably wouldn't need any money. But one thing that has always upset me, and I really generally mean upset, because I've seen people, and even now, they're stood there with their one fold-down table and a couple of banners and everything. And their dreams of doing this, that, or the other are always squashed down because they can't afford to do it. I've been in meetings over the years where you go, hey, wouldn't it be great to have this? And wouldn't it be great to do this? And then they go, yeah, but we can't afford it. Right.
Do you think the GoFundMe campaigns have helped with that? Because I know that's something a lot of local communities have done. And maybe if there's anybody watching that's had success fundraising in your local area, you could chuck that in there. Because to me, I think that's the key is finding ways to access the funds ourselves. Yeah, but literally just starting a GoFundMe campaign saying, here's this great idea. And then hopefully we can get people to get excited about it and
Yeah, I tend to think that I've always thought that to get the big bucks into the grassroots, you need to transfer it from the kind of power and money centers of the movement. And but you could do it that way. If people were convinced that it would be more profitable in terms of the movement or the cause, it'd be more profitable for them to donate to the grassroots. And then we had a structure by which they could do it, which is something that's being worked on, rather than renewing their subscription to several national groups. Well, maybe that would work. In the age before the internet, we actually tried to take over a few national groups in order to to disband them and give their money away. That was the plan. In fact, they even took us to court to stop us doing it and stuff.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think there's a few different questions floating around out there. I mean, I think we're just dancing around probably one of the key, I guess, if I may say, I think probably one of the key things we see a bit differently, because my perspective would be help give the grassroots the tools necessary to raise funds on their own, whereas it sounds like from your perspective, it's more about moving away from the national group model, whereas my thought is let them do their thing and we can do ours. Do you think that's a fair synopsis? I mean, I appreciate some of this is conversations that have led up to this, not necessarily this conversation specifically, but
well, I think you make a reasonable point. But I mean, I always respond by saying things like, this is the age of the internet, and I want somebody to say, and I'm excluding and bracketing off the vegan society in this respect, but what do these national corporations do in the age of the internet that the grassroots can't do? And nobody can answer that, in the sense that I know that there are still a lot of people in Britain, breaks my heart this, who are still beholden to the national groups because they make good leaflets and they like to give away their shiny leaflets. Well, as though we can't do the leaflets and we can't organize a way of doing leaflets and, sending templates to get printed out. And the best thing about that, you see, the point is, when you give out a national group leaflet, you're actually doing free labor for them, because it's their logos and it's their kind of details, and it goes back to them and all that. Another thing we ought to talk about is legacies, but I mean, maybe we could come back to that. But that is an important point within this discussion that we ought to talk about.
yeah, and welcome to everybody who's been joining us. I see Sam and Jennifer's also joined us, and Corey's got a good response to the point I just raised, is that, if we just leave the national groups to do their thing, that they're actually a bit of resistance. And the thing I would add to that, expanding on the radical activism front, I mean, that is a big concern of mine, because I think one thing we've been trying to do with the Animal Rights Show is bring back animal rights, but really just, to me, it's quite simple, shifting the focus back to ending use versus improving treatment, which the movement is rife with, whether we know it or not, through our language. So I do think the national groups have a lot to answer for, as far as pushing that welfare-driven message. I don't know if we have the capability to do what we're talking about here. Is the other thing. If we're going to focus our efforts on that versus actually getting on with it, I don't know how that would even transpire. But
going back to Corey's point, I remember being. I'm not going to name any names. I remember being in the office of one national group, where they were on the phone to the office of another national group, telling them to stop attacking the ALF, because there was a sea change in the movement, where because the homes had started to dry up, then the actual physical liberation of other animals started to lessen, and the amount of economic damage started to rise. And that scared some of the national groups, who was hitherto fairly cautiously supportive, let's say, of the direct action thing. And then when there was a change, it meant that the press were asking them difficult questions and everything. And so they started, in fact, to join in with calling the activists terrorists and stuff like this. And until they all started doing that, there was quite a lot of discourse and dialogue between them by the ones who kind of like were the last to kind of give it up, as it were. And this had really serious ramifications for the movement, but it's not relevant to this thing, but it's relevant to Corey's point there.
Yeah, and just building on with that is because one of the simple answers, or at least on the surface appears to be, is for the national groups to help support the grassroots and some of those big ideas you're talking about that local activists can't do because they don't have the funds. All of a sudden, getting some funding from the national groups, but I think to Corey's point, could be a bit of a Trojan horse. I'm not sure if it's speciesist for me to say Trojan horse or not, but it seems like a good thing on the surface. But if all of a sudden, like to your point earlier, if we're using their leaflets and their this, that, and the other, we're actually kind of doing their labor.
Jeremy, Trojan horses made out of wood, aren't they?
It's about the symbolism in our language, Roger. You know this. Come on. Cultural speciesism. Come on.
I think the idea to cut the umbilical cord between the national groups and the local groups would, if you like, give the local groups their head to really develop in the way that they want. It's very kind of liberating in that sense that you actually we need a structure where you go, you've got some ideas, where we can help you, kind of thing. We can fund that, and that to me would be very liberating, because people then would see, in the way that we are seeing now because of social media, one group can see that, you see the type of videos that one group put out, and then the other groups kind of do it and all that. And so, we're almost proving that we don't need the national groups. I mean, how many people on this call check in with the national groups and see what they're doing, compared with checking in, with some of the entrepreneurs or other stuff that's going on. They're almost like peripheral, and yet we've got money centers in the movement. That's the thing that worries me, because of all kind of reasons. As soon as money gets involved, then you've always got a problem, because that's when you start to get people behaving maybe in ways that are not necessarily the best for the movement or the cause. I mean, this is a personal opinion, obviously.
Yeah, well, and I think that's the whole thing. I think we generally try to do these things for about an hour, and we're obviously not going to address all the questions here, but I think the important thing is that we're having the discussions. Kevin raises a great point about the GoFundMes. Yeah, that basically still an issue of multinational and national groups that aren't just after funds from big philanthropists, but also go after the general movement to donate to effective organizations. Politically, the civilians need to be given more standing alongside the nonprofit professionals. So, and that's kind of like the whole activism by proxy, isn't it? If we mail in our $5 once a month, or is that job done? Kind of that perspective as well. And we need to be multi-dimensional in our activism, don't we? It's not just about sending off a check once a month. It's about more than that. But
yeah, that is, yeah. In fact, I saw a national group did this. I've not seen this since, oh God, the 80s. Give us a donation to help us to help them. We used to get that a lot in leaflets, and I actually saw an organization do that recently. I thought, wow, I mean, rather than go do, if there's an issue, go sort it out and we'll help, type of thing. With the grassroots kind of ethos, if you like. It was more like give us the money and we'll do it for you. You can then sit back thinking, well, I've done my job. Let's get back to Netflix. That's not revolutionary. Going back to Kevin's point, just for clarification for people, because there's a bit of coded language in there, especially the last sentence. That comes from the vegan strategist Tobias Linhart. He talked about people being the paid people in the movement, being the professionals, and he called the grassroots civilians in the movement. And that's the way that they see us. They see us as lesser than. We're the civilians, they're the professionals, the experts. And it's kind of really what's needed is for us to behave ourselves, give out their leaflets, support their events, and give them the money, and they'll do the job. That's not revolutionary.
More competition versus collaboration, it sounds like.
Well, it's just that it's their way of thinking about us. The grassroots are not the movers and shakers. The grassroots are just the kind of cannon fodder, but the people who would create the funds. And then, of course, we've got the relatively new phenomenon now, because when the federation started, we were talking about just people giving donations I mean, just to illustrate that, when I was in Liverpool, and then in 1982, I went to the BOAV on their executive committee, and I felt really, really guilty, because I used to have to claim £12.50 for expenses for the coach. I would go on the coach because it's cheaper than the train. And I would do that. And the reason for that is that when we were in Liverpool doing our stall, which we did about three times a week in those days, there was this little old lady who came up, and she's bound to be dead now. She was really old then. This is the 80s. and she would give us a quid, which is a lot of money in those days for a pensioner. And she'd go, "This is terrible, isn't it?" And then a couple of months later, you'd see her again. "Oh, is this still happening? Isn't it terrible?" And when I used to go to the BOAV every month for the committee meetings, I would think, well, my expenses is 12 and a half of these little old ladies giving you a quid. So money meant something to me. I mean, we're not talking about getting $12,000 a month on Patreon in those days. The money gets sucked into power centers and the power elite of the movement. And I've always been opposed to it, and I've always been very wary of it, and I always think it disempowers us. I still do, obviously.
It's a balance on multiple levels, isn't it? Because you need the funds, but you also, don't want the funds to, change our advocacy. Just another point from Corey here. Nick Cooney once blogged for Animal Charity Evaluators in a piece meant for uni students, arguing that the best way to help animals was to get a good job paying and then donate more to big groups, such as an incredible missed opportunity and such evidence of the neoliberalization of our movement. And that's kind of the earn to give, if I'm interpreting that correctly, that earn to give philosophy. I mean, what's your take on the earn to give idea? I mean, do you think if the money was able to funnel to the right places, that there could actually be something to be said for that, for people that are high earners to actually focus on that, and that's their advocacy? Or do you think it's a bit of a distraction from radical movement?
What was that concept called again, you said?
Earn to give. So the whole idea is that if you're an exceptionally high earner, that you can give far more funds to support the movement rather than being on the ground, as it were.
Yeah, okay, but I mean, we're into that thing about.
I'm sensing a bit of hesitation.
No, but I mean,
I'm not saying I agree with it for what it's worth. I'm just putting it out there. Yeah.
What it's like. Essentially, if you're rich enough, giving money away is in your financial interest, and that's the kind of reason why a lot of that kind of goes on. But that's the kind of new phenomena. I mean, obviously, funds coming from anywhere is one thing, but I think we ought to be very wary about where it comes from, even though, of course, money from anywhere is useful. But there's obviously got to be thought about that, and especially if the strings attached. I mean, we've seen a recent kind of example of where a big donor has started to kind of stir the waters because something was happening that he didn't like, and apparently this guy is a he. And it's caused ruptions in the movement, and so I would prefer just for people, ordinary people in ordinary jobs, just giving their subscriptions, but to the grassroots. That's how I've always thought about it. This kind of new entrepreneur thing, this new kind of venture capitalists and all that. I'm very wary about that because of what they are and who they are.
And I see a few new additions. My mom's just joined us, and looks like the Crank's in the house, who has a point about Nick Cooney using the money to sue women who spoke up about him preying on them. So that's certainly not where we want funds to go. And I think that's it. When we have, I think that's it, isn't it? Because if we have these power centers, like you say, where all this money is collecting, it's unlikely. It's increasingly less likely that money is going to be furthering the cause of animal liberation. It's going to be, building retirement accounts. So I guess from an efficiency perspective, I think you made the point earlier, if I can try to dial in a bit, would you say that the grassroots is more efficient with funds?
No.
So, okay, it's just that if we can distribute the money, it can be, I guess, more directly used.
I mean,
the thing is, it needs to be dispersed widely, and there needs to be some level. I was a auditor in a past life, so there needs to be some level of financial controls to make sure that there's not, there's adequate oversight over the distribution, I guess.
Yeah, well, the thing is, the grassroots are cheap compared as well. I mean, the projects that the grassroots come up with, they would probably need a kind of stream of funding, and so in that sense, there could be an element of control, kind of democratically arranged control, if you like. And so if there was a kind of fund that could be developed there would obviously have to be a way for people to apply to it, and then for the stream to be set off in their direction. But there'd have to be checks and balances, because there are going to be some people who go, oh, this is good, and they pocket the money and they bugger off. Because, I mean, we even had that in Ireland, you know. I mean, Declan Bowen's, I mean, his group is called VEGO, Vegan Education on the Go. And the reason that he called it that was because he wanted veganism and vegan education to spread all over the country. And so that's why he called it that. And he wanted to enable that. And he's given, you know, posters that he's made personally and all that, and bought fold down tables for people and all that. And, you know, we're not necessarily sure where they ended up, but so there's gonna be some problems, but don't get fooled by thinking that the national groups are efficient. I mean, I've known national groups, you know, they update their computer system and buy all the wrong ones and waste thousands and thousands. So sure, there's a risk with funding the grassroots, but because they're cheaper, you're not kind of taking as many risks, you'd think. And also you'd have to work out a way of controlling that. I mean, I know that doesn't sound too revolutionary itself, but you'd have to do it. Otherwise it would just be an open tap then. And obviously that wouldn't be any good.
It's a delicate balance, isn't it? Because we almost need a structure in between the national groups and the grassroots, because we do need some level of centralization, just maybe without the rigid controls. So we need to have, you know, minimize as much as possible the duplication, but then still have the local groups to have the flexibility to do what they want to do. So
yeah, but, you know, we're in the age of the internet. There's no reason why we can't have representatives of the groups. I mean, they could organize locally, then they could organize regionally if they wanted to. The regionals could then have representatives. You know, we could probably organize a democratic structure where people would have their say, and because it's not based on a kind of power hierarchy, it's based on, you know, the entire idea is to aid the cause. You know, because this is a problem sometimes. Going back to the BUAV, I used to know a couple of the BUAV committee people. Used to think the letters BUAV were kind of magical, and you know, in fact, I seem to remember. I think they were sued by the Boots at one time, and they were ordered to give them a few tens of thousands of pounds. And I remember Ronnie Lee saying, in that case, the BUAV should just fold, just collapse itself, disband, in order not to pay that, because Boots were vivisectors, right? And, you know, I remember Ronnie saying, I would fold the ALF in a second if it was good for the movement. That's the ethos that we need.
True, it is a very different mindset. And Jake just asked a clarifying question around if there's some value to grassroots folks taking power within the nationals. What are your thoughts around that? I mean, the BUAV's been mentioned, but do you think there's something to be said for that? I mean,
well, that's what kind of happened during the radicalization of the BUAV, but then it became clear that probably the more radical thing to do would be to take it over in order to destroy it, which I know sounds destructive, but it's actually very creative, because the idea then is to spread that around into the grassroots. I mean, in those days, you know, we were all involved with some forms of direct action, you know, the NAL and all this kind of stuff, and hunt saboteurs, we're all sabbing and all this kind of stuff. I mean, I remember in Liverpool, there was Dave Callender working until 4 a.m. On reports for the HSA, and he had a battered old Volkswagen Beetle, you know, kind of Herbie car, you know, little old blue car, and we were fighting all the time to keep it on the road, you know, and yet the guy did so much. You know, he organized the Waterloo Cup thing, he organized the grouse shooting in the north. He was, you know, and another thing that's important, I think, is probably to think in terms of, you know, a lot of new vegans don't know this, but the idea of full-time activists is not new. If you think back to, what is it, Jeremy, in the 80s?
In the 80s, I don't have a clip for that one yet, so I'll spare you.
If we think back to those times, there was more full-time activists then than there is now. It's just that they weren't taking wages out of the movement, and they weren't superstars, and they weren't. In fact, most of them used to wear masks, not so they could stand in the cube. It's so the police couldn't recognize them, and so it was a different time back then. You know, I myself had several false names, including quite a few female names. You know, Sarah Dean and Jill Lockwood and all this, and it was because we didn't have any desire to become famous. I remember a conversation I had with Ronnie, and we said, you know, it's funny, isn't it? You know, we never thought about becoming rich via the movement. You know.
Well, that's it, because we've talked about this before, haven't we? Because just because the money's coming in doesn't mean there's not some underlying good motivation there. It's just, I think the theme we keep coming back to is the money corrupts, both at a group level and an individual level, or at least it has a strong potential to do so. Maybe not universally, but it certainly seems like a risk we need to be aware of. Yeah, some more comments coming in. I mean, just because it sounds like we need some level of centralization. Talking about Nikki's talking about getting a big office space and printers and so forth. Because I mean, I think if we leave it to the local level to come up with their own materials, as you were talking about, we've got to have some level of working together. Otherwise, it's kind of time prohibitive to actually, you know, for local groups to get out there. And I think the big thing that we keep coming back to is just the lack of organizers.
Well, yeah, but that goes back to the federation in the early days. I'm not going to say the number again. In the early days, where before the age of the internet, we were thinking that we would have to kind of get together and draw up loads of leaflets that covered all the single issues that everyone was doing at the time, and instead of, you know, essentially doing the same job in leaflet form as all the national groups were doing. So anti-vivisection stuff, anti-bullfighting, whatever it was, anti-circus stuff, all the things. And you would have these leaflets, but you would leave a space, right? And the idea was to send them out to all the local groups, and they would either be able to buy stickers or one of these rubber stamp things and stamp their own details on it, so it became their leaflet. Now, in the age of the internet, it's even easier. You just centrally organize some leaflets, and you can just send them out. And then the local groups can either print them out. I mean, like Vigo and VIP, all our leaflets have been done with a it's over there in my room. It's just a photocopier. And Vigo leaflets have been a photocopier. The idea that you need to have these big, fancy, shiny leaflets, which are probably bad for the environment, by the way, compared with having zine style or just, I mean, people, you know, I mean, I've got film of people. They come up. There's Go Vegan World stuff, all nice and shiny. There's the other stuff which is just photocopied, and they're just taking the stuff that looks interesting. They don't give a monkeys about whether it's shiny or not, and looking professional, all that bullshit. You see, that's just mythology, I think, in the movement. That it's got.
Well,
you know.
I think I'll push back a little bit on that, because I think if we frame this as a debate, we can't agree too much. Well, I mean, I think if we just, you know, we're tearing pieces of paper in half and writing a website on it, that's going to have a different uptake. You know, obviously it doesn't change the moral question. I think we all know that. But I do think that having a designed, I'm more of a fan of more of a closing card, or, you know, the business card shape versus leaflets, because I think they're less likely to be put in someone's pocket and more likely to go in the bin, which, to your point, isn't great from an environmental perspective. But
yeah, but I'm not talking about ripping a piece of paper in half and scribbling on it, Jeremy. I'm talking about you have a proper design. I mean, the VIP have got proper design. You know, three-fold leaflets.
Sure.
It's just that we printed them out on the photocopier, and we also did a deal with a photocopier thing where we got the ink free. So we're really kind of, you know, reducing the costs. You know,
I think there's a point of diminishing returns. I think some thought about the presentation is important, but yeah, to your point, there is, yeah, it reaches a point where it's a bit superfluous, I think, and perhaps a waste of funds. There's got to be some centralization, though. I think is that maybe a lesson we could take a little bit from some of these groups that, you know, that are starting to scale up, but it seems like we hit a certain point. You know, Corey's point earlier, talking about a group that was 20 years in before it failed. I mean, we'd be lucky to make it to 20 years, I think, as a group. You know, for a lot of the groups in the animal movement right now. But I mean, it seems like we keep
the show then for a minute.
Well, coincidentally, this Sunday is our 20th. We don't count these towards the count,
Oh
but
yeah,
is our 20th show. So if you want to join the Animal Rights Show for the 20th edition this Sunday,
yeah,
20% of the way to 100, right?
yeah, folks. I've tolerated Jeremy Hess for 20 years.
You beat me to it, tolerating
I know,
myself.
yeah. I knew you were going to do that, so I thought I'd get in there first. Yeah,
Got to be quick.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one for me because I think the comment you made earlier around we could liberate ourselves if we were less focused on these national organizations. I think there's definitely something to that. However, I also think there's a risk associated with that. That while some may be liberated, some may benefit from that guidance. And I'm not necessarily framing it that the national organizations are where they get their guidance from, but I think in general, local groups need some level of guidance and support to organize.
This is the age of the internet, though, Jeremy. You can get guidance. You just have to put it on the internet, and you'll get millions of people talking to you within an hour. So what's the
It's
problem?
highly unstructured, though, right? Like, let's just say, I mean, I think we're both a bit advantaged that you're in Dublin, I'm in Brighton, both have huge activism scenes, several different groups, all working hopefully together on some level, lots of different things. It's a buffet of what kind of activism you want to get involved in. But for you, let's just say you're the only vegan in the village, so to speak, and you want to start doing, I mean, focusing on street work. Obviously, there's lots of different forms. How do they get, they go on the internet, they go to the Facebook page, I mean, where do they go to get this information? That's so,
Well,
I
actually,
push back on it being so simple.
funny enough. I want you to explain to me what centralization means in a minute, but I'm going to do a film with Declan Bones because he started Vigo about 7 years ago. It might have been going before that, but he actually started on his street work about 7 years ago. And it was just a little fold-down table, and he kind of put it out on a Facebook group that he was going to be there. And I think on the first week, nobody turned up. So he did it on his own. And then the second week, an English woman turned up, and they did it together. And then they had some ideas about, should we get some leaflets, or maybe, because they had some railings behind them, should we get some who can hang on? And so they developed. And now they've probably got physically the biggest street outreach thing in the world now. It's absolutely huge. It takes you a minute to walk past it. It's so big. Somebody said in the banner, in the comments, I think it was Nikki, I think.
I just popped it up there, yeah.
Yeah, we need banners. Well, we've got 12 banners, these roll-up banners. And, they're kind of 8 foot tall and, 4 foot wide and all that. They're very, very effective. But also, you need to keep updating them. You need the funds. Declan's got lots and lots of kind of double A3 big huge posters which we hang up, and but they get water damage because he makes them himself. Even down to you put all that sticky back plastic on it and all that and do all that. But if they were made by the local printer, they would last for years. And just needs a bit more money. Give Vigo just $20,000, pounds, euros a year. That would massively improve what they do. People are getting that per week.
Yeah, well, and just on a side point on leaflets, this is a good tactic, I guess, that for the rights-based advocates out there, which hopefully a lot of the fans of the show are, is that actually selectively taking parts of the leaflets that you agree with and maybe losing the parts that you don't, to Corey's point about specifically taking off the back page that had the welfarist message, which, yeah, it'd be hard to find which bits to keep and which to lose these days, I think. But
we used to cut the bits off leaflets that we didn't like.
So it looks like all these little bits missing.
The thing that came
use it as a decoder ring. You hold it up to a newspaper and it has a secret message if you look through all the holes. Is that how it?
Do there was one time when the local groups had to pay the national groups for their leaflets, and it was pretty expensive as well. For the privilege of keeping them rich and the power elite of the movement, you had to pay them to get their leaflets off them. Obviously, the internet and all that changed all that, and now Oh, isn't it wonderful? You see comments. Isn't it wonderful? You can get this national group to give you leaflets free. Well, of course, it's their advertising. You're providing free labor for them. Of course, they're going to give you it free nowadays.
Well, and I think just to provide a bit more color to that, I think when you're not kind of tuned into the right space side of things and you're not seeing, I mean, we we trade messages all the time, don't we, about all these welfare messages jumping out. I think if you're not tuned into that, the idea of getting the leaflets just mailed to you can be quite appealing. But I think once you start to look into the messaging, I mean, Human Love Solidarity here said, making the communication simple and short, with using new vocabulary and narrative with an emphasis on a better future. I mean, I think once you start tuning into the messaging, internally and having those discussions, it's possibly less prone to doing that. But on the surface, I think that, if we could change the messaging, I think there's something to be said for that because they are providing a service. If you're just going out on the street by yourself and you don't have the funds to just have the leaflets ready to go, could be seen as a good thing.
Yeah, we need more leaflets with "Have mercy for animals" written on it.
I don't have the logo ready to go with your head exploding. We normally do. Well, and I think
Nikki says not everybody is technologically minded, okay, and can use help. Well, yeah, but that's the idea, is to provide that help. It's almost like a challenge 22 for activists and for organizers. The idea would be, to help people. One group would say, well, we got around that problem by doing this. It wouldn't be hard in the age of the internet, Zoom calls and all that, just to get a group of people together who were organizers and say, well, how did you do it? Well, how did you do it? Well, how did you do it? And then people go, oh, I never thought of that before. And oh, well, I didn't think of it that way. We could solve this problem. It wouldn't be. This is the age of the internet. We've got global mass community. We're the first group of activists to have this, folks. We've got instant global mass communication. We can talk to the world. We are, in theory. Now, we can do that.
I think we have the tool, but I would push back that it's not sharpened. I don't think we have the communication channels that are. Maybe I'm getting a bit metaphorical. It's not. Back to my earlier question. If someone's looking to do their first street event, they have nobody in their local area. I'm not sure where they go to have this amazing resource on the internet. And just quickly to segue into Corey's comment, because I think it warrants some clarification of what I was saying around guidance. What I found, having run 2 student groups, was that most of them came in fully programmed from the larger groups. The larger groups socialized and set the standard for activist thought and action. They squashed innovation and critical thinking. And I think that, just a quick pitch, because I know Corey brought it up in one of our calls, this book was phenomenal and talks a lot about how the current movement just basically hands us all these materials, and that's basically how we think about so-called speciesism. And we're pinned into this framework. So this is AFCO's newest book. I highly recommend checking it out. That I agree. Like, we need to, I think you had a clarifying point around centralization. I don't mean a group telling others what to do. I'm more thinking a place for us to do what you just said, collaborate, and there's a space for anyone to share what they've done and say, some of us may be web designers or video editors and put footage out there, which I know takes a lot of time doing it myself. I think we can have centralization without a dictatorship model.
That place called the internet, though, Jeremy.
So what is this internet that you keep talking about? How do I get on this thing? I mean, if we wanted to do a live stream, how would we do that?
It was developed for the army, apparently, and now it's leaked out to the likes of me and you somehow.
Yeah, I mean, does that help clarify what your point around centralization? And I mean, do you think that perhaps guidance isn't the best choice of words, but I think we need a collaborative tool that is easily accessible but not easily controlled, if you will.
Well, you can have guidance in a kind of sense of collective reflexivity. In other words, everybody just talks to each other and they come up with ideas and kind of, and then somebody said, well, we're going to try this, and you go, okay, try that and get back to us. Did it work? I mean, things will develop. animal rights violations are not going away anytime soon. It's not as though we've got to do all this by next week. Otherwise, we could just shut everything down anyway. Unfortunately, we're in this for the long haul.
But then we couldn't hang out anymore, Roger. You'd start to miss me.
Yeah, right. I would, honestly. I want to put that on public record, folks, on the global internet, that I would very, very much miss Professor Hess here.
Yeah, maybe we can hear some thoughts in the comments. I mean, maybe where do you go on the internet if you were we probably have a lot of organizers or activists on the chat with us right now. I mean, where would you go on the internet, or where would you recommend people go maybe to get more information? I mean, I think there is a lot of it out there.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Wouldn't you say, look, I want to find this, I'm looking for that. It's just the same as, if you want to find a vegan caviar, you put it on the internet and somebody tells you where it is. So, I don't think that's necessarily a problem. But also, if that kind of a resource is absent, then yeah, we probably need to create it. But it's not as though that's beyond our capabilities either. And then the first thing to do would be to contact the people who are already kind of doing it in some form, and they could explain how did they set it up, how did it go, all the rest, and then we can learn from their mistakes even, and maybe do a bit of shortcut, or don't do this, do that. We could learn just by having discourse and dialogue amongst the organizers in order to grow and facilitate. And then once people are really in the kind of swing of it, then they can delegate, if you like. That's the wrong word, I know, sorry about that. They can kind of encourage others to branch out, and then go, okay, well, we're doing this. Well, you could do this in your local area. I mean, Ronnie's ideal type is to have vegan events going on everywhere, not just in the big city centers, but in.
And by event, clarifying, we're not talking about demos. We're literally talking about more the festival model.
No, anything.
Okay, just event in general, just an umbrella term. Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, like, really, the idea is not to tell people what to do; it's enable them to do what they want to do.
Right, and inspire them, to Corey's point, to continue that critical thinking and thinking of new ideas versus mimicking the.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, Corey mentions the lack of critical thinking. Well, it is true. We need to inspire them to think. And one of the things that stops them thinking is the fact that eventually, within 5 minutes, they think, well, I wouldn't be able to afford this anyway. I've seen that so many times. Yeah.
I mean, I think there's obviously a lot to unpack with this. It sounds like we're saying something very similar. I think we want to see that collaboration. I just don't necessarily think it's happening at the moment on the scale we need it to be happening. And the I word, the internet, I think it's there. I think it's just not necessarily being, connecting in the way that it could. I mean, yeah. Actually, the start of the Animal Rights Show was a collaborative Facebook Messenger chat that just kind of grew from there. And I think those types of things, I actually started one for outreach and another one for collaborating on creating vegan content specifically for social media. So anyone feel free to message me if you want to be added to those.
Yeah, it's true, Jeremy. But it's that's just the way it was, But at the moment, the internet is being used to support either the national group structure, which funnels money into them, or now it's being used to create and support these figurehead people. And all of it is really saying to the civilians, we'll do it, support us, we'll do it. The idea is there's a problem here, let's do it, let's all do it, let's solve it, let's do it. This is a community thing. One citizen talking to others, one citizen organizing with others to get something going, sabbing, direct action, whatever they want to do, but it needs to be done. It's like a can-do situation, not a can-donate situation. Hey, that's a good slogan, isn't it?
I was just gonna say.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you planned it, but that just came out, didn't it? Well, I think Elliot has a little bit of a correction here. He says that, or Elliot says that you could still hang out, and that they remember you saying that when you're younger, that they asked you to come to a party, and that you said you would come once rights had stopped being violated. So it sounds like you and I can party and hang out once this whole thing's over. Once, like you say, we just start doing it instead of donating.
Yeah, we've got a lot of work to do first before we have a party, I'll tell you that.
So don't book it in. Well, yeah, with social distancing or physical distancing, we've got some time anyway. So
yeah, don't put the vegan sausage rolls in the oven just yet.
All right. Well, I think we've just scratched the surface here, but let's keep the conversation going. I think I know it's gotten me thinking more about kind of how that structure could work. I know it sounds like you're working with Ronnie on a currently new idea to try to create that connection and that network. Do it versus donate. Do you have any other closing words other than that?
I don't think I can top that though, could I really?
I should have hit the stop button right there, shouldn't I have? Go out dramatically.
Yeah. Yes,
All right.
Do it and don't donate.
Well, with that, thank you everybody for joining us, and see us on Sunday for our 20th episode of the Animal Rights Show.